I will share after this as well. I'll post up a link to the slides in our meetup. There's a lot of links and resources in this, so I don't want people to feel like they frantically have to take notes or to try and do like screen captures. And I am recording the webinar as well so that it can be watched later. I have a couple slides which you'll see. I'll say, this is a list slide that has a tons of resources and links on it. It's not one that I'm going to read to people or that I'm expecting anybody to try and figure all of that out and write it down frantically during the webinar. It's more because I'm intending to hand this presentation out to people with clickable links. So just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. And I think at this point, we'll probably get started and hopefully some other people will join us. It looks like we had one person who said that they had already looked at accessibility for their website, which is awesome. Otherwise, I think, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the background and we can talk about more detailed things if we need to, if there's more advanced questions as well. Do feel free to use the questions box, and as I said, I will pause and chime in. This is a little different for us. Normally for Austin Food Marketing meetups, we are in person. So we'll see how this goes. And at the very end, I do have a poll where you can say if it's informative or if it helped you or not. And feel free to let us know if you want us to try and schedule some of our other meetups this way. Otherwise, right now we are bumping speakers to the fall in hopes that we'll actually be able to get together in person and we won't have to worry so much about germs then. So just to get started, I'm Amber Hines. I'm one of the organizers of Austin Food Marketing, and I am the creative director and CEO of Roadword Creative. I'm not going to talk a ton about myself. We don't normally do that at our meetups, and I wasn't really planning to do it today, but if you are interested, later on you can reach out to me and I can tell you a little bit more about our background and what we do. We do a fair bit of accessible websites on more of the nonprofit, government, and higher ed space. So we work with clients like Colorado State University, Workforce Solutions in the Panhandle of Texas is a recent one that we did. And those websites are required accessible. We cannot launch them because they have legal requirements. So that's sort of my background and where I'm coming at this presentation from. So to get started, I want to do just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I want to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of what website accessibility means, why it's important, and how you might be able to accomplish it. We're going to talk about some of the current laws related to website accessibility and whether or not they might apply to you as a food business. And then we're going to talk about how to identify common accessibility issues on websites and know how to test your website for accessibility. I'm going to assume that most people here are not developers, so there may be items that come up that you cannot fix, but we are going to talk about some things that you can fix, and then what the options might be if you identify things that you can't fix. And then finally, I want to talk about how to develop ideas for creating a culture of accessibility at your organization. So this could apply to if you are a founder or a CEO and you are the primary decision maker, but you want to create that culture and bring your employees and your other team members on board. Or this could apply if, let's say, you're the marketing director and you need to go to the board or to the CEO and talk to them about how to make accessibility a priority for them. So we'll talk about this, and hopefully it should cover all of our bases with different job roles. So the first thing is website accessibility. What is that? An accessible website is basically a website that can be used by all people of all abilities and disabilities, different languages, those sorts of things. All of that comes into accessibility. An obvious thing that we often think about is visual impairments or hearing impairments, but I like to share this sort of mind map because it shows everything. And it's not just, disability is not just the traditional, I'm a blind person and I can't see, and so I use a screen reader. It could be things like older people often have visual impairments, so as people get older, these accessibility features can help them. Or outside of visual impairments, people that are less savvy with the web, people that have cognitive disabilities in some instances. Also, there are things like situational disabilities. So if someone broke their right hand and they can't use a mouse, They are temporarily disabled in a way that they have to interact with your website only via a keyboard, let's say. And then eventually that might go away and they'll be back to operating it normally. So all of these things, and these are different examples of disabilities that could impact someone's ability to use your website normally. And what we want to achieve, ideally, is having a website that can be used no matter what circumstance someone is in. So why does this matter? I always start with this really early when I give this presentation, because I think that is one of the harder things to communicate in some instances about why accessibility is important. And in some cases, it's even thought of last. And so I'd like to talk about it at the beginning, and we'll circle back to this a little bit more when we talk about how to create more accessibility within the culture of your organization. So the first thing is, more than 1 billion people in the world have a disability. That's about 15% of the world's population. And it's 1 in 8 people in the United States have a disability. According to the US Department of Labor, disabled Americans spend over $200 billion in discretionary spending alone. Now, we're in an interesting category when we're talking about food, because it's not really discretionary spending unless we're talking restaurants or eating out or something like that. If we're talking food products that are bought and sold either direct to consumer or at retail, then that 200 billion doesn't even cover that. And so that number goes up a lot higher. And that was before. And now we're in this crazy land, as we all know, of e-commerce, because we're all sitting in our homes, not going to meetups and not going to stores unless absolutely necessary. So this is an interesting chart. I saw Power Reviews did an audit of 1.5 million review product pages that have reviews on them that use their plugin on more than 1,200 brands from February through April. And you can see the orders increasing. The page visits are increasing, but not at all to the degree that orders are. So people are making more purchases and actually finishing it instead of just researching and then leaving. So we had this huge jump in e-commerce in the last couple months. 25% e-commerce sales increase since the beginning of March, Adobe Analytics found, when they compared the last half of March to the first half of March of this year. It was a 25% increase. 62% increase in order online / store pickup e-commerce. And this is what, I mean, some of us might think, okay, this doesn't really apply to us in food. I only sell retail. I don't do e-commerce. However, they might be doing more research at those things and deciding if they're going to do it, or looking at your product and then going and ordering online and going to the grocery store. And this chart, I think, is really fascinating. It's the impact on the fastest growing categories in e-commerce in the United States as of March. And this is percent change compared to March of 2019 to March of 2020. And you can see that we're not talking about e-commerce growth in clothing or e-commerce growth in computers or anything like that. A lot of this is non-discretionary spending. Things like soups, dried grains and rice, milk and cream, pasta, vegetables, right? All of these things are food product businesses, and they're having huge increases in e-commerce sales. So there is a huge population of people that are now going online to try and buy that. So I like this quote. John Copeland, he's a vice president of marketing and customer insights at Adobe, and I was reading an interview with him, and he was talking about how right now, because so many people are using e-commerce to such a degree that they had not done, but they're also doing it in a time of high stress when they might be using e-commerce because they could not find what they wanted locally, or because they're afraid to go out, and everything is going on, what we've been seeing with the panic buying and stuff like that. They're a lot less forgiving right now. And so the companies that meet or exceed their needs will be able to build loyalty and increase the lifetime value of that customer. So when you think back to those huge numbers of people that are disabled Americans, and then if you also think perhaps that some of those disabled Americans have even less of a reason to go to a grocery store, then you want to try and capture them or provide them with their needs online, because they're more likely to be doing that and interacting with your product and your brand online than they ever have before. So why, circling back, so why does accessibility matter? The first two things is, one, it's just good karma, right? It's how can we make it so that everyone has the equal ability to interact with our brand and our products. It allows you to reach all people, right? But beyond that, there is this business case for it. A lot of things that are good for accessibility, which we'll talk about more later, but one example is adding alt tags on your images, which you may or may not know what that is. And if you don't, that's fine, because we'll talk about it again later. But another is it's good for SEO, right? So a lot of these things that are good for accessibility help our websites to show up higher in search engines. So SEO is search engine optimization. So it helps you rank better without having to pay for ads. It increases revenue opportunities. Obviously, the more people can engage with your website the way it's intended, the more people, therefore, can actually make purchases of your product, especially if you have e-commerce, but even if they're just trying to make a buying decision and whether or not they should add it to their cart for grocery store pickup. And in some cases, it's legally required. So those are the reasons why accessibility matters and why you should be thinking about accessibility at your company and with your website. Before I move on, are there any questions? I haven't seen any yet, so I might just keep going. But if you do have anything about what it means and why it matters, feel free to throw those up and I will answer them. So I want to talk about accessibility laws. Right now, I'm going to start by just saying I'm not a lawyer. I do a lot of work on accessible websites and I follow what's happening in the courts related to accessibility because it is relevant to our clients, but I'm not a lawyer. So if you're looking for legal advice, you're not going to get it today. But what I can do is I can give you a nice little synopsis of the laws and how it might impact you or not. And I'm going to breeze through a couple of these because some of them will not be relevant to you, but I want everyone to have a good picture of what laws exist out there related to accessibility. So the first thing I want to say is, why are there laws about accessibility? It's because equal access is considered a civil right. And there are certain things that we have said in our Constitution that all people should have equally. So things like education, transit, voting. In some cases, like employment, right? Non-discrimination laws might exist, those sorts of things. So outside of food brands, this can often impact companies if they are giving information related to any of these items. Otherwise, it comes down to other things like the equal ability to participate fully in our society. And when I talk about some of the case laws, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I did see that I saw a question about where's the best place to find information on demographic breakdowns by type of disability. I think there's a couple of different resources and I could look them up later, but I would say that I would look at the U.S. Department of Labor does have some, and probably the Census Bureau also has some. It's hard because there are some disabilities that are not tracked publicly. So there could be disabilities that are, let's say, if they have a seizure disorder and your website flashes too much, it could actually trigger a seizure for someone. But I don't know that there's any public tracking on the number of people with seizure disorders necessarily, but I can look and try and find some resources for you after that. So moving on with the laws, these are a couple that I'm going to gloss over. So this really started with the Rehabilitation Act in 1973, and there were two parts of it, Section 504 and Section 508. And these really don't apply to food brands for the most part. These apply to government agencies, federally funded projects, K-12 schools, those sorts of things. So unless you're getting grants and receiving federal dollars, then Section 504 and Section 508 does not apply to you. So it's one less thing that you have to think about. But they do exist, and that was the very beginning of first saying that we needed to make sure that even technology was accessible to people with disabilities. There are, with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, there are actual things put into place that state what to do if someone thinks that they have been discriminated against or they're not receiving equal access, and there is an official complaint process for that. The next one, which also doesn't typically apply to food companies, is the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Again, I'm not really going to talk a lot about this for you guys, so I don't think it's necessarily there, but there's a link if you want to read more about it. Now, what does apply to food brands? The biggest one, and the one we're going to talk about a lot today, is Americans with Disabilities Act, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. I'm going to be calling it the ADA. There are two provisions in it. Title II says that communications with persons with disabilities must be, quote, as effective as communications with others. So communications could mean letters, it could be marketing materials, it could be emails, it could be phone calls. It's your website. And Title III deals with the public accommodation of people with disabilities, which used to be just thought of as a public place, but more and more there are cases that are starting to say a website counts as a public venue or a public space. So these are the two titles in the American with Disabilities Act that could apply to a food brand. There are no clear laws on how ADA applies to the web, no regulations, but there are an increasing number of lawsuits filed and won under the ADA. I don't have an updated number for 2019. I've been looking and I can't find one, but this, I think, gives you a good feel for how much this has jumped and become a really important issue in the last couple of years. So in 2017, there were 814 website accessibility related lawsuits under the ADA. And in 2018, that number jumped to 2,285. So it's a huge increase. So I'm going to talk real quick about this. This is a list of a few, and I want to touch on 3 of the different lawsuits so that you can get a feel for whether or not they might apply to you or how they impact. So a big one you may have heard of was a Domino's case that went to the Supreme Court last year. Domino's has online ordering for their pizza. Yes, you can call them on the phone, but they also implemented this online system where you can order for either pickup or delivery. And a man who was blind went on and he could not use that system. And so in 2016, he sued them. Domino's lost in federal courts, and they said that they needed to have an accessible website under ADA laws. And here's the thing, Domino's could say, well, he could pick up the phone and call. But the thing is that's not equal access. Equal access means that if a sighted person can use a web application to order a pizza, then a non-sighted person should also be able to use a web application to order a pizza. So the solution would either be have no web application for ordering a pizza or have a web application that can be used equally by all people. Domino's lost, and they were told that they had to fix their website and there could potentially be damages and things like that. Domino's appealed. They petitioned to try to get it to go to the Supreme Court. And in October of last year, the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear your case. And the lower decision stands. So right now, that pretty much means it was a loss for Domino's and a win for that gentleman who sued them, saying that, hey, you really need to have something that can be accessed equally. Winn-Dixie in 2016, Winn-Dixie is a grocery store. If everyone's not familiar, it's kind of regional. They were sued because their website was not accessible to blind people via screen readers. It's a tool that can be used that reads out all of the text and describes what the images are on the page. This was one of the first cases about screen readers access to websites. And what really stood out about this is that they argued that the website should be held to the same standards that physical locations are relating to the ADA. And and Winn-Dixie lost, and they had to set aside up to $250,000 to fix their website. Now, most website remediations, they don't have to cost that much money, so I don't want you to see that number and get freaked out. But that is what they had to set aside to have available for that. But the big thing now is this is the case that said a website, if your physical place has to accommodate people with disabilities, your website does too. So you say, okay, what if I'm a CPG that does not have a physical brand? We have a great case here in the form of Blue Apron. Blue Apron does not have stores. They're direct to consumer only. They only have a website. In 2017, Blue Apron was sued under ADA because they didn't have alt tags in place, that thing I mentioned that we're going to talk more about. They had videos that explained what their products were, like the key features and benefits of getting the Blue Apron service, but they didn't have any captions on them. So a non-hearing person would not be able to understand what the features and benefits of Blue Apron were from that video. Blue Apron attempted to have the case dismissed, but the district court in New Hampshire denied that motion. I think this case is still pending, but it is notable because it's been said, no, that we're not going to dismiss. We're going to hear the lawsuit. We think that this lawsuit is potentially valid. And again, they don't have a physical store. So they are a website only type of brand with how they engage with consumers. The other thing you do need to think about, and when someone is small, it's maybe not as big of a deal, but as you grow, this is something to think about, is that it's not just the public that you need to have accessibility for. You also have to have accessibility for your employees. So there have been cases where employees have sued their employer because they were required to use certain software within their job duties, and they were not capable of using their job duties because that software was not accessible. So if you have team members that have certain needs, you need to think about that as you're considering your software, and that could impact on the website, and that could impact what sort of content management system, for example, you choose to use, or if that staff member is responsible for updating your website content. And then on top of the ADA, the other things that you want to take into consideration is if there's any sort of state-funded laws, if there are any local governments, so your city or your county might potentially have laws that impact you. Also, if you ship your products outside of the United States or engage with consumers outside of the United States, then you want to think about what other world laws might apply to you. And this is a link you can go to that tells you a lot about what laws exist in the world related to accessibility on the web. So does anyone have any questions about, I don't think we have any questions yet for laws, but if you have them, feel free to put them up and I can answer those. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some different best practices, and then we'll actually talk about testing and how to look at and identify issues on your website and potentially fix them. So when we talk about accessibility and having a website that is accessible to everyone, it seems like sort of a vague concept. How would you know what all of this is? There are actually 4 criteria. They use the acronym of POUR that have been identified and agreed upon and are a worldwide consortium standard for accessibility. And that is that things need to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that information needs to be able to be transferred from one form to another. So the example I gave of Blue Apron had videos that describe the benefits of their service, but they did not have captions for those videos. That is an example of information not being transferred from one form to the other. The audio information was not available as a visual alternative for someone who's not capable of hearing audio information. So if you have videos, you need captions or transcripts. If you have, and so sort of the same thing, if you have a podcast that you do to promote your brand or any sort of audio. If you have visual images and someone is visually impaired and cannot see those images, then you need to have a alt tag, which is available so that screen readers can read out and describe to someone, you know, happy man eating vegetables with fork, right? So they know there's an image of a happy man eating vegetables with fork right here. Or that can describe the pictures of your product on its plate that says something like, you know, mint chocolate chip ice cream, green with chocolate flakes, something like that. So you need to think about all of your content and can it easily be transferred into different ways of understanding. Another thing that's really important is that the main content and message should be separable from the way it's styled and presented. So a big thing that we see sometimes is when designers design graphics with a lot of text on them, or they design a page and all of the text is like maybe it's wavy or it's styled in such a way that it would be really hard or impossible to do on the web as text. And so they say to you, well, just make it an image. But what happens then is that all of that text, so if you had a quote, let's say from your founder, and it's not actually on your website as text, it's on your website as an image rather than text, then someone who is visually impaired and cannot see that image would not be able to get that message out of that content. So that's what you have to think, is that messages and main content have to be separated from the way it's styled or presented if possible. They can be separated if someone needs to. Operable. Operable, the big thing here is not everyone uses a standard keyboard plus mouse to navigate the web. And I say that, I know if for those of you who've looked at accessibility before, you're probably aware of this, but this is something that I think a lot of our clients don't think about. It's really obvious to us, those of us that use the website in a typical manner with a mouse, that we can just move our mouse and click on things. But other people are frequently interacting with the website via only a keyboard. They might be tabbing through. And so they use the tab key to move through the website. Also, users need to have control over time limits and timing. So if you have a slider on your website and it goes really fast and there's a lot of text on it, they need to be able to pause it if they're a slower reader so that they can read and make a decision about whether they're going to click. You need to have clear instructions for any time there's a form, or if you have an e-commerce process where people are adding things to carts and then have to move through a checkout process. It needs to be very clear what they're supposed to do in order to complete their purchase in that instance. And then on that same vein, if they make a mistake, let's say they missed a required field, there needs to be error recovery options that are very clear and that explain this is what was wrong, and it needs to obviously highlight like the field in red, and shift their focus back to it or something like that, so they know, oh, I missed this field, I need to fill it out, so they know how to keep going without having to start over or without being confused and lost. Understandable, this relates mostly to the content that you have on your website, so it needs to be appropriately targeted for language and reading level. Typically, if you're dealing with the average public, that would mean an 8th grade reading level. If you were going for, there's different levels of accessibility standards, and the top level, which is not always achievable, is AAA. And in AAA, if you have anything over 8th grade reading level, then you need to provide an alternative simplified summary. You may have noticed this on government websites, how they'll have something and then they might have a very simplified version that explains it in very basic words and short paragraphs. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to get it down to that 8th grade reading level because that is what's considered the average. Again, if you're targeting, now with food brand, I'd say we want to try and stick towards that average reading level. If you are, maybe you have something that's very high class or very expensive product, or something where you're like very clearly targeting people that you know have advanced degrees, then possibly it might make sense to have a higher reading level on your content, but you really do need to think about that. You need to have supplemental representation of information. So if you have graphics, videos, then you want to, as we talked about, have a transcript, or if you have a chart, you should have a little explanation of what the chart is, just in case someone can't see the chart or what information is in the chart. And then understandable functionality. So this relates to your navigation structure. Does it make sense how pages are organized? Does it make sense how people might go from one page to another? Do you have tooltips available? You've probably all seen these. When you're not sure, there's a little question mark, and so you can hover over it and it pops up a more clear explanation. So that's something that helps with understandability. And then the last item is robust. Do you support functionality across current and, as much as possible, future devices, operating systems, and browsers? So we don't support Internet Explorer anymore. Microsoft doesn't support Internet Explorer anymore. That's fine, right? But trying to think as much as possible, what are people using and what makes sense? And then you might validate against the technical standards for that platform, whatever that might be, whether it's a website or if we're talking about a mobile app, just to make sure that you are being consistent with what is done as a best practice in that platform. So this acronym, the POUR acronym, how do we actually translate that into websites? I gave you a few examples, but I want to talk a little bit more about specific items. And I always like to pause here and say, when should you start thinking about accessibility? I love this photo. Ideally, not at the end of the project. Now, you guys all are probably coming here with, you already have a website, and that's fine. So, we got to figure out what can we do. But in an ideal world, if you are getting ready to plan a new website build, and that's what made you decide to listen to this, for example, then maybe what you want to do is start talking about accessibility in the very beginning, because there are 3 places where accessibility comes in, and that is design and content and development. And your design and your content happens way before anyone starts coding out your website. So I'm going to talk about some of those things. And this is a graph that shows the most common accessibility errors. It came from a study that was done. They crawled the top 1 million websites, and by top 1 million, that's based on the Alexa rating. So it's based on how much traffic the website gets. So websites like Amazon and things like that are very high in that top 1 million. And they looked to see what errors existed on the sites. The largest one, 85%, had low contrast. And what that means is that the colors from a foreground, and we're going to look at an example of this in just a little bit, is very closely or not significantly different from the background. And this comes up a lot in design and with colors. Designers, unless you have a designer and you said to them, we need to be accessible with our color choices, oftentimes they might be like, oh, let's put a light blue text on a dark blue background. It looks cool and it's, matchy match, right? But it's not accessible and it's really hard for people to see. And so that's where you need to start thinking about sometimes accessibility very early in the design process. Missing alt text, this is something that it helps you with SEO, as I mentioned previously, and it allows screen readers to describe the image to someone who cannot see the image. Empty links, missing labels, missing language declaration, that's a coding thing. Empty buttons, some of these are coding things, but some of them are content or design choices that were made early on in the process. So these are what is most commonly seen. And the percentage here is 85% of the websites they crawled, of that 1 million, had low contrast or contrast errors. 68% of them had missing alt text. So it's a huge number of websites have these issues on them. So I'm going to start with content, because I think most of you have the ability to fix these problems as they exist on your website. Like, you could leave this webinar and go do these issues on one page tonight, right? They don't require a designer or developer typically if you're using a content management system, something like WordPress or Shopify or Squarespace or Wix. So images need appropriate alt text unless they are decorative. So maybe a little border banner that you have that's literally just a line that goes across the bottom and it's an image, you could leave that blank. But any image that actually has meaning to your page or provides additional context or shows your product it should have a description that describes what it is. And again, we're going to look at an actual example in a minute here. Don't add text as images. I've talked about that already. Captioning videos and providing transcripts. I've talked about that. Being careful about reading level. Avoiding rapid flashing. So if you do happen to have a slider, looking at the speed that it's going, you don't want it to be more than 3 times per second, or you could literally cause someone to have a seizure while they're looking at your website. And this is one of my favorite ones, so I gave it my own slide because we get this all the time with our clients when we're getting content from them. You're writing a blog post and you say, oh, we're going to link over to our products. And so we say, to visit our product page, click here. And we put the link on the words, click here. This is really bad for accessibility. And the reason why it's bad for accessibility is because people with screen readers, they often are trying to figure out, how can I go faster through a web page to find the content that I want? And one of the options is they can just listen to all of the links. They don't have to have it read them, let's say, the 5 paragraphs or even the full paragraph that you have to get to that, to visit our product page, click here, right? So they could just hear different links, but what it would say to them is, click here. And they wouldn't know what they were, why would I click here? I don't know where it's going, because they can't see the literal context of right next to that is visit our product page, right? So in this example, you would want to say, you know, you'd either link the full thing to visit our product page, click here, and that entire thing would be a link, or you just change it so that you say, go to our product page, and that would be a link. So again, like, this is something we see all the time and we constantly are teaching our clients about, but this is something that probably any of you could go and fix your content yourself without needing a designer or a developer to help you with. Then we talk about accessibility and design. Some of this you may be able to do in-house, some of this you might have to bring someone in. So websites need to have a consistent interface. This means things like your heading sizes should be the same. An H1 on one page should look the same on another page. Your navigation bar should be in the same place and look the same on all the different pages. You need to check color contrast. Beware of line length issues. This relates to how long on the page your content is, how wide it is. We typically don't recommend having content areas with paragraphs of text or smaller fonts that are larger than 700 pixels wide, just because the longer it gets, the harder it is for people's eyes to track across and read. You want to make sure that you keep related items close to one another. So if you have a really wide width and you have, let's say, a form and you've got the name of the label, like name, and then there's a place where they can enter their name. And on a small screen, it's fine because they're very close together. But on a wide screen, they end up getting far apart. If there's a big space in between them, it can be hard for people to understand that this is the field for my name and this is the field for my email address. So you really want to make sure that you're keeping related items close together with small gaps, as if possible. You need to design focus dates for links and buttons. These allow people that can't use a mouse to see where their focus is as they tab through a website. And again, I'll show you an example of this in just a minute. And you want to design for error states, which I've previously discussed. And then there's accessibility and development. I have this information in here. I don't think I have any developers on the call, and I don't think that it necessarily makes time for me to talk about it in detail. I would certainly be happy to talk about it later if there are questions about it. Otherwise, this is here so that you can refer to it later, and you could certainly talk to your developer about it if you need to. So how do you test your website? There are free tools out there, one of which is wave.webaim.org. And the first thing you would want to do is run your page through that testing tool. We're going to actually take a look at this. And I hate to call somebody out, but I was like, who can I say, I love this brand, but their website needs work? So we're going to look a little bit at Tillamook. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Tillamook. You know, they're pretty cool. This is their website. It's pretty simple on the home page, but you know, it's nice, modern. Obviously, this is a newer website. It's not something that's been sitting around for a long time, right? Also, they're in California, not California. They're in Oregon. They're on the West Coast, and so they're closer to California, which increases their likelihood of being sued because there are lots of accessibility lawsuits happening in California right now. So this is their website. So if I was from Tillamook's marketing department, let's say, and I wanted to search this, I can use a tool. There's either a Chrome browser extension, I'm in Chrome right now, or you can use a tool, you can go to that Wave website that I mentioned. So let me actually go back real quick. So you go to wave.webaim.org, you put in a web page right here, and then you hit go. And it's going to generate for you a report. So this is the home page only. It's only testing this one page. Now there are other options that will test multiple pages, or you could work with somebody that would actually do a full audit for your website. But if you're just doing it on your own, you're trying to get a feel. So the home page has 0 errors. It has 15 contrast errors. And if I click on the details tab, I can actually, it might help me. So right here, it's saying this element is low contrast, and it might be hard, and it will highlight them as I click through. If I click on this one, sometimes it can be a little bit, so right here, so do we see, we believe, like this over this, and even I sometimes, like that cow's word right over the cow's white face, you know, that's a little bit challenging. So that's how their homepage looks, and that's what this looks like in Wave. That alt text on images, let's actually look at this. So this is their products page for their ice cream. And I could tell you right now, like without me even using the Wave tool, that there's going to be issues because this light brown with the white, I don't think is high contrast enough. This like blue on the blue, probably not. So I bet you this website is going to have a lot of contrast errors. So I'm going to show you the Chrome extension now. So I have this because it's much faster for me. Just click through a website and then I click it and it just opens it right up in Chrome for me. So this page has 44 errors on it, and 21 contrast issues. And then if I go to details, I can see almost all of what they're missing is the alternative text. And so what they have not done is every single one of these products, they have not described what the image of their product is. So if someone else were to come here, depending on how this is set up, they might not even be able to, if this is just a link and it has an image in it, they might not know how to go to the product page for vanilla versus going to the product page for strawberry, because they don't know what the description of the image is, and that will link them to that page, depending on how the link is set up. I haven't inspected the code on this website, but that you know, would be something. So this is a great tool. It's super easy to use. And even if you don't understand necessarily all of it, what's really nice is that they have one of these tooltips right here, and it will take you over to their reference, and it says missing alternative text, what it means, why it matters, how to fix it. So it has this for every error, and it's totally free tool. You can either use a Chrome extension or you can go to that website. The next thing that you want to do, and let me just do a quick refresh on Tillamook, is you want to do a tab through your website. So pretend that you cannot use a mouse and figure out what would that experience be like in order to go through your website. So I'm hitting tab on theirs. The first thing, if you can see right here, that little blue box, that's the focus state I was talking about. So now I know, I hit tab for the first time, it brought me to their logo, okay? And I hit tab again, and I have no idea where I just went. Down below, I can actually see, I don't know if you can see this in my browser, it went away, but it said the link that I was on, but so now I'm at, do you see down there, tillamook.com/cheese? But the page hasn't moved. I can't see it. I have no idea where I'm going. So an example, actually, I can show you real quick of maybe a better focus. So if we look at this, we have hidden, do you see there's something popped up when I hit tab, skip to content. So I could choose right there, I don't want to go through the navigation, I just want to skip down to the content. Or I can go to the navigation, or I can skip to the footer, or I can start tabbing and it tabs me through. And you can see as I tab through the navigation, and then I can say, oh, I want to go to this. I'm going to go to, you know, one of these pages, and I hit enter on my keyboard. And now I'm on this page, and I'm going to skip to content because that's what I wanted. So now I've jumped down to the content, and I can watch, I'm going through the filters. You can see the little blue box. Right now I'm on limited submission. Clear filters button just changed, so I can see I tabbed there. Now I'm back up at the top on my ordering, and you can see as it moves through the content, right? So this is focus states, and this is a website that has been really optimized for someone to use if they cannot use a mouse, which would be somebody who don't have the motor skills to use a mouse, temporary, like I mentioned earlier, if they have a broken hand and they just can't use a mouse, or it could be somebody that is visually impaired and therefore they can't see the mouse and see the screen, and so they have to use a keyboard in order to use their screen reader. So those are the first two items that I would do as far as testing. So let's see, where was I? It's right here. And then the next thing you would want to do, and I'm not going to demo today because it's a little bit harder to do over Zoom, but you would want to navigate the site using a screen reader, and that would actually read out for you what the content would be, and then you can hear it as someone who is using a screen reader would, and you will learn a lot of things because you'll say, oh, I think I've got all the alt text and I've got all the screen reader tools. My developer coded all those in, and then you actually use it and you're like, well, this sounds weird. Why is it just saying, you know, click or something like that? And so then you can go back and actually fix that little element. And then the next option, which if you're a really big company or a bigger brand and you have the resources, 100% conduct real world user tests. We do it. There's a nonprofit down in Austin called Knowability that you can hire that does it. And you can get actual visually impaired testers to use your website and provide you feedback. And just like watching them use your website and trying to get the information, you give them problems. Like you say, okay, how would you buy our ice cream, right? Or how would you find which grocery store we are located in? And then trying to watch them like get that information will teach you a lot about, did you do a good job or did you not, and how can you improve it? And like the testers we use are really great. Like they are very thoughtful, and they'll say things like, you know, it would be really good to have just this link right up in the header so I can get to it fast, because honestly, this is what I want when I come to a website for a company. So those are the best ways to test your website. These are more resources I'm not going to talk about, but those are some of the things that I talked about, and you can click on those links if you are interested. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to keep going, but again, feel free to pop some in if you want. I'm going to talk about creating a culture of accessibility, and then we'll have final questions at the end. So how do you sell accessibility? Number one, lead with data and show, don't tell. If you are a normal corporation, you're not a nonprofit, we all know that like we're in business maybe because we love to, you know, create healthy organic food, or because we made something and we just love watching people's face when they're so happy when they eat it. But bottom line, we're businesses, we need to make money, right? So if you are trying to convince someone that accessibility is important and it is worth investing in accessibility, you need to explain the potential bottom line impact. What is the cost? And how can this help us going on? And maybe that's a little bit of fear, like, hey, Blue Apron got sued and we also have a box product, you know, like we could get sued too, and it could cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars and lawyers' fees or more, maybe millions, you know, right? Like, so maybe it's talking about that, or maybe it's talking about, hey, if we make our products more easily purchasable or more easily found and sourced by people with disabilities, then that increases our user base. So it could be a little bit of fear, or it could just be like positive talking about how this can help your bottom line. So again, make the business case for it. Number two is you need to know your organization. So whether you are talking about, whether you are trying to sell accessibility up the chain, or whether you are trying to sell the actual workers in your organization on why they need to be part of accessibility, whether it's your developer or your designer or the marketing person who does your social media, right? Because accessibility is probably more than just this one little thing, it's everyone, and we'll talk about that more. But you need to figure out, how can you connect accessibility to your mission, possibly? Can you show, again, the business value that is specific for your organization? Like, how will it really help you as a company? And then the other thing too about knowing your organization, especially if you are presenting it to your board, or to your CEO is that you need to present it at the right time. So if you always plan budgets for the next year in November and they're finalized and they're set in stone, then probably right now it might, like, you might talk to them and say, hey, this is this thing. Let's start to put a plan together so that in November we can put together our budget so that in 2021 we can do it. That might be a lot easier of a sell than, hey, I know our budget's set in stone, but I realize this is really important and we have to do it right now. And that might be the right thing to do, but at the same time, like, you have to kind of think about that and how you present it. We've seen a lot more success with people when they're being very conscientious about these things and actually getting the buy-in from the other decision makers and the other people. And then the third thing is, if possible, you should put a face on it. So show real people who benefit. If you can do user testing, you should have your board, your CEO, your website developer, whoever it is that really would take a stake in it, be present at that user testing. Because again, as I mentioned, like, it is so eye-opening to see someone struggle, and hopefully they aren't struggling. Hopefully it's like they're mostly doing it and there's just one or two things that they don't quite get. But to like literally watch them get stuck in, let's say, a pop-up, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, we thought a pop-up would be really important, and now we're just like, you know what, it's not worth it because it is so hard for these people to interact with our content, and we care about making our content accessible to these people. So the more you can show like real people, and even if they can't be present, like, we've done user testing for where the company isn't here and we video record it so they can watch the video later if they want to, even if they only watch part of it, just to hear and see the actual human being who is being impacted by the website. The next thing is, can you find real world customers? So your actual literal customers who you might use an example. And remember, it's not always just like, oh, well, I don't know if someone's blind and they buy our food. Remember, older people. So if you know that your demographic is typically older, then this kind of stuff would apply to them. Or if you are, let's say you make bars and they're for really active people, and you know, hey, some percentage of our rock climbers might fall down and break their arm at some point in time, and they still need to be able to access our website even though they can't use a mouse temporarily, right? Like, trying to think about, do you have real customers that you can show will benefit from it? So once you do those three things, then it's a lot easier to sell accessibility within your organization. And another thing that's really important to understand is that accessibility is everyone's job. It takes leadership from the top and responsibility from the bottom. So you have to create this culture. That's what I've talked about, the culture of accessibility, that in our organization, we care about accessibility. And accessibility is going to be something that everyone says. You know, I've heard a story where, you know, a different, you know, company was just starting to think about this, and they were working with a designer, and all of a sudden the CEO says, wait a minute, I'm looking at this new graphic you made me. Is that an accessible green? And the designer's like, well, oh, I don't know. And the CEO's like, I don't actually know what that means, but I know we're supposed to think about accessibility. So you go find that out and then come back, and then I will tell you yes or no on this graphic, right? So again, even if it's not necessarily your job to make the thing, it can be your job to remind the people who are making the thing that accessibility is important, and that they have to be able to answer, yes, this is accessible, and they have to know what that means, right? And then trying to figure out, if you are the person who makes the thing, like, how can you build that into your process, and how can you help to encourage more leadership from the top if you need that for your coworkers or things like that. So the best way to do this is to make accessibility central to your operations. Number one, draft an accessibility statement. Share with your employees, your vendors, your volunteers, make it public. You need to have, like, this is what our company thinks about accessibility. And this day and age, I feel like there's so much, consumers really care about values, and there's a lot of value-based purchasing that is made, where people are using values to shape the decisions they make on which companies to go with when they're choosing the food products that they want to buy. And so this is a way that you could potentially stand out and that you can make your customers interested in purchasing your product or realizing that, yes, you care about this thing. So draft an accessibility statement. I have a slide that has a ton of links to different examples. We have one on our website that you can check out as well. Next, designate an internal accessibility champion or committee. If you are a small company, it's one person. One person who knows it is their job, and that could be you if you're really small. If it's like you and one other person, and then you work with contractors sometimes, right? Or if you have a team of 10, let's say, like it's just you, but you're the person who always says, is this accessible? If it's not accessible, it has to be accessible, right? Or if you're a very large company, then you have a committee that is like, hey, we don't launch a new web page, a new landing page, or a new campaign until it has gone to the committee has tested it, they've said, okay, yes. Even if that committee is made up of one person from marketing and one person from the sales floor who just is interested in this and wants to be on that committee, right? So having an accessibility champion or committee that reviews things and really makes it their job to make sure everything's accessible. The next thing is planning regular trainings and updates. There are courses, there are workshops, Knowability, that, and it's KNOWABILTY, know, like KNOW, like something. That nonprofit does every May, they do an in-person conference. I'm not sure if they'll do in person, but they always do webinar as well, all day long. They're here in Austin, and it's all about accessibility and website accessibility. So you could have people attend that. We do in-person trainings. There's also other companies, there's certifications that you can get if you're super serious about it. But try to have trainings for your staff, because how can people be the accessibility champion if they don't, or how can they contribute to accessibility if they aren't taught what that means and how to do it? Include all staff and volunteers in efforts, so make sure that it is part of everyone's job in some way. Create a plan for escalating accessibility issues as they arise. So what does this mean? If someone's on your website and they have a hard time, they might use your contact form, or they might call your phone number and say, hey, I'm trying to find this, I'm trying to figure out what stores you're in, but I can't do it. So because my screen reader can't access your store locator tool. Well, if you have an accessibility plan in place, then the person who answers the phone says, okay, I will help you right now. And they help them find the stores. Give me your zip code, I look it up. Okay, I'll tell you, these are the products that are in the grocery stores near you. Okay, great. But after they hang up the phone, what they do is they immediately call whichever person at your organization is responsible for the store locator tool, and they say, hey, I just got a phone call from someone who was trying to use a store locator and said that the screen reader didn't work and they couldn't find stores. So that is the plan for escalating accessibility issues, as opposed to I helped the person, I hung up and I forgot about it, right? So try and think about, like, what is the plan and what makes sense in your organization? How do you document that this existed, and then how do you try to fix it? The next thing is scheduling regular tests and compliance monitoring. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone forgets. It's, missing an alt tag, or just like writing click here, or whatever that might be. So you need to have some sort of plan in place so that you are regularly monitoring once you've gotten your website super accessible. It's kind of like SEO, right? SEO is an ongoing thing. If you want to rank in search engines, it's not like you do one thing over the course of a month and then you never have to touch your website again to stay ranking well in search engines or to continue to rank well, right? It's the same sort of thing. If your website content is changing, which it probably is, then you have to regularly monitor that and do different things in order to make sure that you are staying in compliance with ADA laws. And then the last thing is, as much as possible when you're hiring, build a diverse and inclusive team. The more people with different backgrounds and different education and abilities, different races, ethnicities, all of those things, the more inclusive you can be in your team and your staff, then the better you are going to be at getting a variety of perspectives to say, hey, wait a minute, I find this confusing. If it's just, everyone's all the same, then you don't typically get as many voices and things might fall through the cracks. So all of this, I want to say, because it's a lot, and I think people hear this and they see that wave tool and they might go test their website and be like, whoa, 50 errors on one page. It's okay to start small. Accessibility doesn't happen overnight. Even small incremental changes can make a big difference. So if you know, oh, alt tags, I need to go add those to my images, and you do that, like that can help people. Or fixing the click here issue on the links. Maybe you don't have the budget to fully redesign your whole website, and that's fine. So you might still have some contrast issues, but you're doing things. And then if you do get sued, what has been shown is that if you can document, hey, we wrote an accessibility statement on this date, we did some tests, these are the things we started to fix, this is our roadmap, then those are the companies that when they get sued, they do a lot better than the ones that were like, what, accessibility? We haven't even thought about this. So it's okay to start small and do what works within your organization and your budget and your time if you're a solopreneur. But you want to try and make small changes where you can, because they all add up and they make a big difference. I mentioned before I had a giant list of accessibility statements. This is them. Again, I'll share it so you can click on them, and we have one on our website as well. This is me. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I don't see any up in the Q&A section, so I'm going to real quick launch just my last. It's helpful for me. How would you rate this webinar? But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I'll be posting the slides, sending the slides out to people who attended, and then we'll go from there. And you can certainly reach out to me later if you've thought about it and you have more questions later. Thanks so much.